Good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy Netzer, the inaugural Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Director of the McMullen Museum and a professor of art history at Boston College. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this members preview lecture for our upcoming exhibition, Wonders of Creation, Art, Science, and Innovation in the Islamic World, which opens February 9th in our Daly Family and Monin galleries. Curated by Dr. Ladan Akbarnia and organized by the San Diego Museum of Art in collaboration with the McMullen, this exhibition explores the theme of wonder at the intersection of art and science in the Islamic world, spanning from the Middle Ages to the present day. For the McMullen's presentation of the exhibition, Calderwood University Professor of Islamic Art, Emine Fetvachi, together with the McMullen team, worked closely with Dr. Akbarnia to adapt the exhibition to the unique spaces of our museum and to enhance its didactic components to better serve our academic audiences across disciplines. We're deeply grateful to our colleagues at the San Diego Museum of Art for their invaluable partnership in bringing this landmark exhibition to Boston College. We also extend our sincere appreciation to our faculty colleagues here at Boston College, especially Professor Kathleen Bailey, Chair of the Islamic Civilizations and Society Program, and Associate Provost for Research and DeLuca Professor of Biology, Tom Childs. Of course, Wonders of Creation would not have been possible without the generosity of our 20 lenders from around the world, with special recognition to Sheikh Hassa al-Sabah, whose remarkable contributions from the al-Sabah collection, now on permanent loan to the state of Kuwait, form a significant part of this exhibition. With Wonders of Creation, we aspire to engage both our campus and the broader community in a multidisciplinary exploration of the intricate relationship between art and science, both historically and in contemporary contexts. I encourage you to visit the events section of the McMullen website for a full list of complementary programs available both in person and hybrid formats, and to register for those of interest. The McMullen is profoundly grateful to those whose unwavering support makes our exhibitions possible. The administration of Boston College and the McMullen Family Foundation. For Wonders of Creation, we acknowledge the generous contributions of the Getty's PST Art and Science Collide Initiative, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Arts. The McMullen's presentation of the exhibition has been made possible through the generosity of the patrons of the McMullen Museum, chaired by Mike Daly and vice-chaired by James McDermott, as well as Leslie and Peter Champy, Robert and Anne Marie Reardon, the Hispanic Art Initiative of the McMullen Museum, and the Norma Jean Calderwood Professorship in Islamic and Asian Art at Boston College. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, the exhibition's curator, Dr. Ladan Akbarnia. Dr. Akbarnia received her PhD in the history of art and architecture from Harvard University and is currently curator of South Asian and Islamic art at the San Diego Museum of Art. A specialist in Islamic visual culture, her scholarship explores cross-cultural transmissions in Iran, Central Asia, and South Asia. Previously, she served as assistant keeper and curator of Islamic collections at the British Museum, where she led the recent installation of the museum's Gallery of the Islamic World. From 2007 to 2010, she was the Hagope Kevorkian Associate Curator of Islamic Art at the Brooklyn Museum, where she oversaw the reinstallation of the Islamic collection and curated Light of the Sufis, the mystical arts of Islam. She's also served as executive director of the Iran Heritage Foundation in London. This evening, she will introduce us to her latest stunning achievement, Wonders of Creation, Art, Science, and Innovation in the Islamic World. Dr. Akbarnia's presentation will last approximately 40 minutes, followed by questions. While she's speaking, please add your questions in the Q&A. And now it's my honor to invite Dr. Akbarnia to share her screen.
I think my screen's already up. Is that right? Thank you so much, Nancy. Thanks, Rachel. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I just want to start also by thanking you for all of the conversations that led to this day. And I think one of the many reasons I really wanted this show to come to the McMullen Museum and to Boston College was because of this interest in the idea of the pursuit of learning. And I just feel like there's really no better place for it to be than in a place of learning. So I'm to today take everyone through a walk, on a sort of journey through this exhibition to tell you a little bit about the narrative and how the show's organized. And then I'll be showing objects throughout, and then I will pause a little longer on some and kind of move past others. And please feel free to ask questions about anything at the end. So I've actually started with 2 images from the exhibition at the McMullen. And in San Diego, we started the same way. You'll see the title of the exhibition and a map of, I don't want to say the Islamic world, it's just a large swath of the world where many of the objects, it really represents places where that have representation in the show. But at the very beginning, before I even go into what the show is about, I just want you to take a look at this group of boats that you see in the case to the right. These are each made of spent matchsticks that have been placed inside a bent, like a used bike guard. And then they've been sort of folded and painted. And these are done by this artist known as Issam Courbage. He's a British Syrian artist, and he's based in Cambridge, UK. And in 2011, when there was the Syrian uprising, the uprising in Syria and the start of the civil war, he was not in Syria, but was very upset by what was happening. And he basically decided to commit to making art that would tell the story of the Syrian people, their plight, whether they were refugees, whether they were still in Syria. And he said he was going to do this until Syria was free. And so since 2011, I mean, it's been about 15 years now, 2011, yeah, 13, 14 years. And this was something that you would see as you would come into the exhibition in San Diego as well. At the McMullen, you'll see it right within the exhibition. And in a way, if people are wondering, what is it doing there? Well, here is an installation, and it's showing a number of boats, and the boats are sort of headed in one direction. So if we go back here, you'll see that there's some, there's a little bit of movement. Some are going this way, some are going the other. In San Diego, we also he spent a lot of time going over like how exactly each boat would move. And for Issam, it was also important that they not actually be on this black background because you couldn't see it from far away. in the exhibition at the McMullen, you'll be able to see them close up, and black probably would have been fine. But what you do is what you might feel is this sense of, whether it's a sense of urgency, whether the matchsticks look like people are huddled up inside. I remember when the exhibition was opening and I explained to my son in front of the artist what the story was. He's 10 years old. And at first he just saw, okay, some boats. It looks like discarded material. But the artist has taken something that we might take for granted, or we might throw out, and he's turned it into a really moving story. And I sort of saw this as the artist's way of reacting to what was happening in the world and finding a way to record this event and make sure that nobody ever forgot it. But in the process of doing it, he also gives you something that draws you in, makes you curious, and as you sort of take it apart, you learn more and more about it. And there are more layers to this story. But the really interesting thing is that now, a few weeks ago in December, Syria, finally the 54-year regime of the Assad regime was over, and Syria is now free. And we'll see what happens. But what is the artist going to do now? So just starting with that, it's just to just it's like a precursor to Qazwini's book, which is the inspiration for this show. So this is in San Diego, and I'm just showing you this because I want to bring up this quote. Qazwini, as I think Nancy mentioned, he lived in the 13th century. He died in 1283, and he was an Islamic scholar and judge. So about 800 years ago, he was living in Qazvin in northwest Iran. And when the first wave of Mongol invasions came, and the first wave was in 1220, 1222. He was born in 1201 or 1202. So he was really about just a young adult. And like many others at the time, he fled west, and he fled to Iraq, west and south. And he became educated there and in the Islamic madrasa, and he became a very respected scholar and judge. And I'll come back to that, but I just wanted to point out that when he does end up writing, he survives another wave of Mongol invasions. And after the second wave, he doesn't flee. At this point, he's actually successful, he's established, and this is when he writes a cosmography. And for those who may not be familiar with what a cosmography is, it's basically a natural history of the universe, and describes everything. And I'll come back to how that's a little bit different than other types of texts or scientific texts. But what's really interesting that I want to point out here is that the show opens with two opening pages of a later copy of his text. And the quote that we had put above it is actually from the beginning of his text. And it says, of the wonders comprising, this is actually from the Persian edition, of the wonders comprising astonishing rarities and strange properties discovered by this humble one, my senses of hearing, sight, reflection, and contemplation desire to record them lest they be lost. I've actually have a different translation of that sense, but this is just his way of wanting to record events similar to what Issam Kharbaj was doing with the boats that we saw before. And you'll see another object as well as you first come in to the exhibition, which is this small bowl, and we'll come to it in a moment. And this is just a close-up of what that map looks like, which you can see here as well. That bowl is another interesting object that just kind of is meant to lure you in. It's this, some call them beggars' bowls, alms bowls. These are used by dervishes. It was made in Iran. But the interesting thing about this object is that when you look at it from far away, it looks really kind of boring and just this dark blob. And when you come closer to it and you come and you see, what's carved on the top, you see these four figures, actually five figures. And then you see an image of this bowl, which is called a kashkul. And these were used by Sufi dervishes to collect alms, to put food in. And so they've carved it, and many dervishes also belong to these craft skills. They carved it, and they tell you in a way what it's for, but also the poetry around it tells you about the values of the dervish. But what's interesting about this, that becomes interesting for the cosmography, is that it's made from half of a coco de mer nutshell. And these are native to the islands of the Indian Ocean, like this, where the Seychelles are. And somehow this made its way from the Indian Ocean all the way up to the Persian Gulf, where it eventually became carved. So this is just an example of some aspect of the world, or an element of nature that can then be manipulated by a craftsman and created into something quite extraordinary, even though it began as something seemingly ordinary. But its path and its journey on its own makes it very extraordinary. So why does this all matter? And why am I randomly showing you objects? This one is just to show you how fine the carving is on this piece. It's actually one of my favorite pieces from the Brooklyn Museum. So we come into, so this is again that quote, and you'll see this picture is from the exhibition in Boston. So you'll see in that first entry into the exhibition, the kashkul or alms bowl, this manuscript, this double page frontispiece, and then you will have passed the boats. And now we'll look at this. So Qazwini's book was called the Ajaib al-Makhluqat wa Gharaib al-Mawjudat, and it means the wonders of creation and the rarities of existence. And it wasn't the first text to be called this. It wasn't the first cosmography, but his was the one that seems to have been the most influential and had the greatest impact because it was copied and translated so many times. He wrote it in two languages. When he first wrote it, he wrote an Arabic version and a Persian version. And the book described the entire cosmos, starting from the heavens and moving to the different elements of air, fire, water, and earth. And that was part of the terrestrial realm. So there are these two main discourses on the heavens and the earth, or the terrestrial realm. And then within the terrestrial realm, he described the different kingdoms. And then anything you can think of is described here. And it's actually very difficult to try to organize an exhibition about that kind of brings it to life, because you could probably file things in different parts or kind of place them in different parts of the exhibition. But these pages are really interesting. And Travis Zadeh, who has done a lot of work on Qazwini, does a beautiful job describing, kind of breaking down this image in the catalog. These are opening pages to a copy of the text that was written over 100 years after Qazwini dies. This is dated to 1421. The actual manuscript that belongs to it, is in Istanbul, but these pages come from the Met. And what those words across the top, you have the verses across the top of the pages and the bottom, they're in Persian, and they actually, before I come back to that, what you can't see, does everyone see me when I see the zooming? Hopefully you see the zooming. You see the title of the book, Kitab Ajaib al-Makhluqat wa Gharaib al-Mawjudat. And then over here, you see the name of the author, Qazwini, and also it connects him to the companions of the Prophet. So it gives him gravitas and it gives him status. And so these are telling you right away what the text is. They're telling you that it's important. And then these verses, interestingly, are by a poet who predates Qazwini, but what he says pretty much sums up what the cosmography is about. And the quote in translation is, "Foremost of all generated beings are intellect and soul. Following after are the 9 revolving heavens. Past all these are the 4 pillars of the elements, then minerals, then plants, and then animals." And that's where he ends the book. And here, if you look closely, you have all the things he describes. The intellect and soul comes back to his introduction, which is what makes his cosmography very interesting. And I'll get to that in the next slide, I think. But what you see here are elements of the heavens. And why do we see that? We see the angels. We see fantastical animals. We see natural beasts. We see the heads of animals in these vegetal scrolls. And then mineralogy comes into play through the gold and through the pigments that are used to make this very exquisite courtly manuscript. So I always refer to this as a kind of preview to the entire exhibition. It really is the entire world on 2 pages. So the exhibition is divided into 4 sections. And the first section is actually focused on Qazwini himself and the cosmography. And Qazwini and how he defines wonder, because that's actually what he discusses in his introduction that makes the cosmography so interesting. After we learn about Qazwini, we know who he is, we know what the context is, we understand what the cosmography is, we understand that he wrote these 2 different ones, one in Persian and one in Arabic, and they have some differences. We actually take a trip through the cosmos in the same way that, with using the same framework that Qazwini offers. So we start with the celestial realm, go through the heavens, then the terrestrial, and then we end with a part of the terrestrial realm, which is actually devoted to a part of the Persian edition of his text that has an expanded text on humanity. So we will have a slightly different journey in Boston, but we do actually start by learning a bit about Qazwini's time period, his lifetime, and also about this idea of what wonderment is. So Qazwini's introduction is one of the most fascinating things about the cosmography, because in it he actually talks about how wonder is, I mean, here's his definition. It's this state of perplexity when we don't understand the cause of something or the impact of something. And Qazwini asks us as the reader, just as we will ask you as the viewers, to actually commit to this path of wonder, to actually learn through wonder. And that is, when you are perplexed, when you're wondering something, or when you have questions, ask the questions, then pursue, the research, try to answer those questions. So wonder becomes both the path and the end point, because Qazwini also says, wonder, it's not, I mean, it's not just for the sake of learning, for the joy of learning itself, but for him, he's coming from an Islamic perspective, where the more you pursue this, the closer you become to God. So by pursuing higher learning, that's how we become closer and closer to God. And wonder for Qazwini means both the most extraordinary thing, like a comet, or a strange or hybrid creature, as well as the most ordinary thing, like a beehive with its perfect, hexagonal cells, or anything, like talking about how a tree is nurtured, is fascinating for him. So before I had talked about how Qazwini, he lived during the Mongol period. He survived these 2 waves of Mongol invasions. At the time, when he was 18 in the 1220s, during the first wave of invasions, he fled west and south to Baghdad and Wasit. And Wasit's actually, interestingly, a place that's known for its reed industry. That's where he became educated. And when artists or artisans or craftsmen or scribes would move from place to place, they could really move their workshop with them, because here is an inkwell, and you can see in this case, it's not very big, that dates to his lifetime, and a pen box. And these are 2 inlaid, probably copper alloy pieces or brass. And this one would have had loops on it that could have been tied to the belt and traveled with the owner. The rest of this section, which I won't spend too much time on, kind of goes through explaining what the cosmography is, about how it's the natural history, how it differs from what we might consider, a scientific, truthful text today, because even, it lists things sometimes like an encyclopedia does. But they're not necessarily in alphabetical order. Sometimes they can be. And it's interspersed with stories. And it's these stories that are not necessarily, you know, we might not think of them as true. That's what makes the text interesting, the cosmography interesting. So it's a this sort of melange of actual research, actual citations of great writers, Aristotle. We have all of these great thinkers and reflecting this translation movement between you know, in the 9th and 10th centuries in Baghdad, where Greek texts and actually Indic texts and Persian texts were translated into Arabic. But here we just look at examples of the cosmography, and all of these, I have to say, post-date Qazvini. The one text that we really could have had that we think might have been penned by his hand is in Munich, and it was impossible to get, and so I didn't even try. But here we have examples that date to the 15th century, so a couple of centuries, you know, not too much longer. But here we have the section on the heavens, where we get the signs of the zodiac as well. Here is a section on the plant kingdom, which is divided into plants with trunks, plants without trunks, and they're each described, their names are given. These are both made in Iran. And then this is an Indian manuscript, probably made in the Deccan, that shows you, it's open to 2 pages from the heavens here. And here is a page, one of those where you get a sense of one of those stories. So he's describing the section on water and on the waters, and he talks about how in this one island there are these strange creatures, like, well, there's rhinoceroses, and then there's this creature whose name I forget. But then he talks about how Alexander and his men come to this island and discover these creatures. Alexander features a lot, as do some of the figures that we know from the Abrahamic faiths and tradition. These are more pages that show, this is showing you on the left, a page from a Deccan manuscript, possibly made in the 17th century, that was made in this kind of archaizing style, as is this page from San Diego. And just by putting these together, I determined that they were probably from the same manuscript. But this is showing you the different eclipses of the sun. And here we have the kind of mother of all seas, so the Atlantic is shown here. And then this is a folio from another manuscript, another page of which is at Harvard, that is on sea creatures. So the really important point that's made at the end of this section is that there was a Persian edition of Qazvini's cosmography. Now, we might see other versions that are written in Persian, but we know that they're not the Persian edition that we think he wrote in his lifetime, because that version has this section where in the animal kingdom, when he talks about humans, he goes off on this, you know, this kind of expands the text and talks about human diversity, different customs, and also these 20 crafts or skills that are attributed to human beings. And among those are really interesting things, like some of them are essential, some of them are, and we'll get to this later. This will come up in the last section, part 4. But here, all you need to know is that 2 manuscripts, one from the John Rylands Library at the University of Manchester, and the left here is these are 2 different pages from that same manuscript, are from a manuscript in the University of Cambridge libraries. This one dates to the 16th century, and it shows you 3 images that are showing you how to use talismans. So, and these often involve a detailed instructions about how you need to draw, like this is supposed to be drawing a woman and then a child behind her, and then you're supposed to do all these things just so, and this explains how to do it. So one of the skills is on making talismans. Another skill is medicine. Another one is carpentry. But when you think about how these are applied and the time that Qazvini lived in, it's very possible that this had something to do, and this is something that Hannah Kamal Hayden has talked about and worked on in her dissertation, how these also reflect something about of society and the cultural context in which people were living, and that these were skills that a princely figure or somebody of high standing would have had to be skilled in. the next section, and these are two, this is an image from the Macmillan, show you works that kind of explore the very end of the animal kingdom section and the legacy of Qazwini's text in general. The very end of his text, he looks at, he talks about these hybrid creatures that kind of exist on the peripheries of the universe. And then there are these other manuscripts that also are cosmographies that explore the world in different ways. So you see that in this manuscript, which is not Qazwini, but is looking at the new world and shows you the creatures that are found there. This is actually different pages from, sorry, a manuscript at Harvard. I don't know why that disappeared. Okay, where he talks about these figures that walk on 2 legs or 4 and have wings and trunks like elephants. What's really interesting is this is actually written in Arabic, but the caption doesn't describe the picture here, even though the caption is describing something that is in the text. So when you're able to read the languages, and honestly, I've seen people wave their, I mean, you guys all probably know about this, the students, you can even get, rough translations of the text. It's pretty amazing that they're able to read some of these manuscripts. But this piece is one of the two major commissions that we were able to procure for Wonders of Creation. I talked to Have Kahraman, who's based in LA. She's a Kurdish, Iraqi, and Swedish artist. And she, left Baghdad. She was from Iraqi Kurdistan and was basically, she had to flee in the 90s, 1991, when the war was. And she went to Sweden. She ended up coming to the States. A lot of her work brings these self-portraits of, her face. She uses herself as a model. But this piece was really interesting. I reached out to her for this commission because she was interested in Qazwini. And I thought, perfect, what is she going to do? Well, she was really interested in creation stories that are described in the text. And, there's one about how all these different elements are sort of balanced one on top of the other. And she takes elements of works in the show or works that she, or what she's read about it, and she brings them onto this figure that's a composite figure. In Qazwini, in Arabic, when you say wondrous things are ajaib, wonders. Strange, where they're kind of rare, are called gharaib. So what's the difference between ajib and gharib, or ajaib and gharaib? Sorry to the Arabs here with my Persian pronunciation of the ayn. Ajib are wonders, and rarities are wonders, but wonders aren't necessarily rarities. So basically, if you think about this big umbrella of wonders in the world, those that are rarely seen or encountered are what we refer to as rarities or qaraib. But what's interesting is, so that's kind of what she's exploring here, this portrait. But kind of like that frontispiece we saw of the first 2 pages of a copy of Qazwini's manuscript, I see the entire cosmography in this book, because she has the celestial realm here. This is actually modeled after that dragon snake, that serpentine dragon that you see as the logo for the exhibition, which is actually constellation Draco. And she brings that here. Then she has, so we've got the celestial realm. We've got the terrestrial realm in these palm fronds. And perhaps this stalk too. She's very kind of obsessed with these palm trees, and because they have a lot of meaning in Iraq, where there used to be millions of them, and then that population went down significantly during the war and because of desertification. And then, of course, living in California, they appear as well. What's really kind of haunting about this is that recently, this artist lives in Altadena. And so palm trees, when they burn and when they die, or when they don't have enough water, they still stand up straight, and they're able to still nurture each other and stay standing because of this very shallow and wide-based root system. And so she's bringing these elements of the universe that means something to her, where she comes from, to her story, personal story, but also have a space in Qazwini's text. And they also persevere, and they can rejuvenate. And so there you see the sort of greens of the leaves that are coming out. And I hope that that's sort of a sign of the future for her and her community as well. But she also brings in the very center, this cloth, this textile that's very recognizable amongst in Kurdish culture and on Kurdish rugs. And she sort of sees that potentially as the origin, as the place of origin. And then you have these three faces here. I mean, there's so many things going on and so many things that she mixes together. These bulbs are the bulbs of the morning flower, and yet they're the limbs and legs of this figure. And then she creates the substrate herself from linen, from flax fibers, weaves them together, and weaving happens to be one of the crafts that Qazwini discusses. And then the alchemy comes from the marbling. And she uses minerals and also acrylics as well. And finally, she gives the name she gives to the piece is Ghoraba, which is a plural for stranger. So it's still the same root as the word for rarity. But what I find interesting is that she seems to be humanizing these rare creatures that are kind of cast, or that she kind of views as outcasts, and with whom she also feels empathy as a refugee or an outsider or foreigner. And so I think for all these reasons, it's a really powerful piece. And it also shows how artists are, contemporary artists are really researching and trying all these different techniques that are truly science, they really are practicing science in their crafts and in their practices. So after this, we actually start on our journey, and I think I put the slide out of order, but we go into the celestial realm. And so you will see text there that talk about astronomy and astrology in the Islamic world. There will be some information about how this big translation movement, or more than one, in the medieval period and between the 9th and 10th centuries, was really when a lot of the information that Qazwini uses in his text, he cites a lot of these writers or these scholars, were translated into Arabic. And so then somebody like him would have access to them. And he's essentially capturing all the knowledge that's available to him at the time that he's writing and putting it in this book. So here I bring up al-Sufi, who is actually is the astronomer who's known, who lived in the 10th century, who's known for comparing all of the Arab versions of the constellations with the Greek versions, and then giving the views from both the Earth, where we look up into the sky, and also from the sky looking down. And so these two images show you both of those views, even though they're actually on opposite sides of the same page. So the piece in the middle these are folios from a manuscript, a Persian translation of al-Sufi's manuscript, so several centuries later, that follow his treatise and show these different constellations. And we're showing Leo in the exhibition. I find it also truly beautiful because in each of these works, you're also seeing something about artistic traditions at the time, and this calligraphic style that you see in the 17th century in Iran, that is very, where you've got the sort of thickening and thinning lines. We don't have this lovely globe that was in the exhibition in San Diego, but I show it because it's signed by an astronomer whose father worked for another famous astronomer, al-Tusi. And we can tie it to Maraghe in northwest Iran, where there was a famous observatory built under the first Ilkhanid Mongol patron in Iran, Hulegu. So this is, again, during Qazvini's time, although it dates to slightly later than his death. And I think I've lost the slide where there was okay, here it is. Where this is what he talks about when he talks about science, because this next section is really focused on astronomy and astrology as well, and treating them both as sciences. Intellects are in agreement and minds are in accord as to the excellence of science and the worthiness of scientists. Through science, happiness is obtained and ranks are elevated. It sharpens the intellect and strengthens it. It increases sagacity and augments perspicuity. It is by it that the indolent is embellished and the obscure is rendered illustrious. And it is with its help that the true is distinguished from the false. All this is especially true for those sciences whose object of investigation is demonstrative and whose principles are indisputable and self-evident. Indeed, this kind of science is common to people of different religions and does not show variation with the passage of time or change of location. So while he's talking about science, I know there will be people in the audience who will know much better than I and who can define this much better. But the word for science in Arabic, ilm, is also the word that kind of encompasses knowledge in general. So what he's expressing here is not unlike what Qazvini is also trying to get us, to appreciate. And it's by asking these questions and trying to learn that we can appreciate and appreciate knowledge and get closer to God. So I've skipped, there's a section before this, sorry, where especially in a museum that not a university museum, it was really important that we have a section where we can kind of explain the connection to Islam. So, where does Islam come in? Because what was important to me was to use an Islamic perspective to do a show on Islamic art and material culture. And if the show is on these intersections of art and science and Islam, then we need to explain where Islam comes in. So the entire hierarchy of this text starts with God. And this is not unlike, if we're looking at Christianity and other faiths. But so that's why it makes sense to start with the celestial realm where the angels live and everything in this area. It's either these. So what I did was I used this common thread of all of these pieces having the words of the Quran, the words of God, the names of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. These are all exhibited in some way on these objects, and they can be used to harness the greater celestial power of God or celestial forces. So whether it's for protection or to gain favor. So you'll see 3 Qur'ans that also show you the diversity of cultural traditions where Islam is practiced. So we have a Quran from the Mongol period in Iran. We have a Chinese Quran from the 18th century. And then we have a West African Quran that could be from Nigeria that's actually not bound. And then here we have a tunic that actually has all of the 99 names of God on it, but actually all of the entire Quran written, all 114 chapters. And I'm going to skip through here so that we can get to some of these other pieces. When in the McMullen Museum, you will see, actually here, you'll see that a lot of these, there'll be a series of manuscripts that are sort of focused on astronomy and some a little more focused on astrology. And these are all texts that were used that every student of astronomy would have been familiar with. And in those texts, they would, whether they were learning, al-Sufi or whether they were commentaries on other people's treatises, there are also sections that show you how to make astrolabes. So many of these astronomers were also astrolabe makers. And so we have a series of those in the exhibition as well for people to look at. And some of them are taken apart and they'll be explained, like what each part means and how they were used. And we also had 2 replicas made of a Persian astrolabe that's housed in the History of Science Museum at the University of at the History of Science Museum at Oxford. And you can actually touch that and move its parts. You can't hold it up the way you would need to use the astrolabe, but it gives you also a sense of its weight. Some were made very small, such as this. These 2 are made by one of the most famous instrument makers, scientific instrument makers, from Iran, Yazdi, and they come from the Islamic Arts Museum, Malaysia. I should mention that 34 loans come from the Islamic Arts Museum in Malaysia, and it's thanks to them that we got some of these really, and as well as Kuwait, but that we got some of these gorgeous instruments, because it was very difficult to get these from other institutions. So here, this was actually when we were first trying to organize this, figuring out a way to show an astrolabe where people could actually engage with it and touch it. And so I'm happy that this can be done at the McMullen as well. There's a section also in astrology, and we're kind of skipping through that. This is actually one of the greatest pieces. I'm sorry about that. We can maybe come back to that later. When you come into the section on the Earth, and you'll notice it at the McMullen as well, because it will be the same sort of sage color. The quote that I had used for this is, I tried to bring quotes from each part of the text that was describing that particular content that you see in the exhibition. So the works in the exhibition either are illustrating something that is described or discussed in Qazwini's text. So if he's talking about astrolabe making, or if he's talking about the heavens, if he's talking about constellations, or they show in the way they're made, like this is a luster painted ceramic plate. This is something, sorry, one second. I think I'm going to have to rush through this. These show you objects that illustrate different aspects of the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms. But just to get everyone acquainted with the terrestrial realm, we start with a couple of images from literary texts like the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, that was seen as the sort of national epic of Iran and the greater sort of Persian world. And I think it's Nizami of Amir Khosrow that feature Alexander as this sort of quintessential explorer. And there are stories about Alexander trying to find the perfect diamond, and Alexander trying to find these other things, and the adventures that he has. And so that also reminds us of this inherent curiosity that we have as human beings to explore the world. So other objects right at the beginning also have to do with traveling and geography. So and even talismanic objects that will have like the names of God and the Prophet Muhammad to keep you safe as you travel. Then the objects are sort of they get divided into mineralogy, plants, and animals. And so these are examples from the mineralogy section. I'm going to kind of go through these maybe. So this one, it's tiny when you look at it in the show. So that's why I really wanted to show you these close-up views of the 3 inscriptions on it. It actually, this is not a ruby, but a spinel that is harder and therefore, I guess, more rare than a ruby. And it's inscribed with the names of 3 Mughal emperors of India, and Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, a grandfather, father, son, and grandson. And these were often passed from ruler to, or given as gifts, either as heirlooms or as diplomatic gifts. And it's really something extraordinary when you look up close to see the work on it. As you go further, there's also a smaller section on the plant kingdom, but in between the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, there's a whole section that's devoted to some of the topics that come up throughout the text that I felt this was the best place, especially because they involve pigments and minerals, you know, and so here we look at alchemy or the transformation of matter when fire and earth come together, what happens, and make the molds that are made for some of these ceramic objects that look very, some people might think they're quite boring, but this can make an entire pot, you know, it's an actual mold that is used to create other pots. These are stamps that would be used to create these impressions on this this big vase. And then we see turquoise used, cobalt used, but sometimes it's for the really, the most banal objects that are made into these really sweet, wondrous little figures like a lion that was used for a bath scraper, sort of a medieval loofah. We also learned about luster technology, or, the inlaid metals, glass. Luster technology was one of the greatest contributions, of the Islamic world to the rest of the world. So there's a whole case devoted to that. We also look in one version, we had the pages from the Blue Quran that have gold outlined with silver. And then here we have this whole story of luster starting on glass in Egypt and moving to ceramics, moving to Iraq, to Iran, eventually coming to Spain, Italy, and even Britain. And in the animal section, there's not a lot of focus on the human beings because they sort of come up next in the crafts. And here we just have all of these animals that are depicted that show us also about the interest of those who are painting these in the natural world. So sometimes you'll see a painting that was meant to be included in an album, but you also see these company paintings. Now, flamingos are not in the cosmography, but the idea of being interested in something and having local artists paint these, and then they would take them back to England to show everyone what they saw. So this brings us to the very end of the book, where he talks about these hybrid creatures. And so this is actually an example of one series, a few of those. But we then move from here and do this little offshoot to look at the crafts. And this is when we get to one of the parts that I've really enjoyed working on, because it was quite new to me, of these different crafts. Qazwini says, okay, I can't even see the quote here. It's blocked. He taught in this section, one of his quotes is that cities contain artisans just as the body contains limbs and faculties. Just as faculties and limbs all assist each other so that the body can function correctly, so too do artisans in a city cooperate with each other so that the city can function properly. So when Qazwini talks about these 20 crafts in that Persian edition of his book, he really he's saying there are these essential crafts like medicine or agriculture, and then there are these desirable ones like adornments, that are not essential, but they're desirable. But they're all part of the way that society sort of works and ticks. And so you see examples of each of these. You have this. This is it's actually going to be an incredible installation at the McMullen. But this area is devoted, is a transition where we're kind of moving from the natural world into plants. So there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of manuscripts that Qazwini references Dioscorides, and he brings in, so he's bringing in the text of a 1st century Greek physician, and that can be used to describe the plant kingdom, but it's also for making medicines. So this just shows you when you go in. What's lovely about this piece, this is by Pantea Karimi, who's an Iranian American artist. And she took these images, she laser cut these images of plants from these medieval herbals, basically, these medieval manuscripts on like Dioscorides. This one I think is al-Ghafiri, who's a 12th century Iberian physician. And she laser cuts them and then hangs them. And these all are described in the text as having particular healing properties. So this section is focused on healing and protection. There are 4 manuscripts that tell you in 4 different languages. So here they are in the show. A Persian manuscript on anatomy that shows the skeletal system, an Arabic one showing surgical instruments and medical instruments, a Malay manuscript, and I think this one is including spells for how to calm a child so that they'll sleep, and then a manuscript on horsemanship and also veterinary care for horses. So I love that, and that's in Urdu, and it's all in verse. And so I find just that in itself really wonderful. In this case, we have instruments like these. These are these cups, and some of you might know better what these are. I've seen them in this manuscript on mechanical devices that shows that they kind of wheel around, where so maybe they scoop something up and drop it as they go around, and the little knobs on them suggest that they're meant to be, connected in the middle, and a couple of cases on adornment. The medical instruments are shown a little more close up here. So these are surgical instruments that are supposedly dating between the 13th and 16th century. A scale, a box of weights and scales that a physician could use to measure medicine. It's probably more likely a physician uses this than a craftsman because it's very, very small. But I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, we do a lot of speculating here. And other works that show you the remarkable work, jade carving and jewel encrusted carvings that the Mughals were very, very much known for, and a very special kind of craft known as kundan, which is really what's happening on the back of this choker, the way that gold, that gems are pressed are set into pressed gold. I'm just bringing this up for if there are any, medical people in the audience. So my father happens to be a retired orthopedic spine surgeon. So he's identifying these as the nerve hook, Cobb elevator. And then what cracks me up is that these are named after, modern people, but clearly they pre-existed, those people. And then finally, we look at, so all of these cases are bringing out elements of objects that are representing crafts described by Qazwini. So one of the crafts is medicine, one is adornment, another is writing or prosody that has to do with the rhythms of verses. And so you see elements of those in these cases, or you see this incredible example of cut calligraphy. These are all words cut in this very elegant cursive script known as Nastaliyev, written by, executed by an Ottoman artist who was known for this, and Emine can tell you much more about this than I can. And the only example of a Baha'i work we have in the exhibition that is by Mishkin Ghalam, one of two famous calligraphers of the Baha'i faith, that's set against a marbleized background. There will be a section also on mechanical devices, and Qazwini would have been aware of these because in the Cambridge manuscript that appears earlier in the exhibition, there is an image of a water wheel, and yet this page was, produced, they're based on images that would have been familiar to the people who were looking at these manuscripts. So they were copied, and then they would, maybe adjust to the style of the time. The final part of the exhibition focuses on the built environment. So the crafts of carpentry, ironmongery, these all come here. But here we also learn about mathematics, this very particular type of architectural decoration known as muqarnas that came out of the Islamic world that consists of these niche-like elements. And then when you put them together, you can create all sorts of designs. And Munir Farman Farmayan, the late Munir Farman Farmayan, who was an Iranian artist, puts these together with this mirror working tradition called Aynakari in Iran to create this series that was titled Muqarnas as well. Each of these, there's so much more I could tell you about each object, but I don't have time. We have this beautiful Jali screen, 17th century India, made of sandstone, that's also in the exhibition. And this really fits in this part of the exhibition as well. Brings and in the exhibition in San Diego, we paired it with a contemporary work by an Egyptian artist who is looking at these craft traditions and kind of put it in dialogue with these screens that you see in Egypt, these mashrabiyya screens. One of the last things you'll see will be this panel, this panel that shows you just one little section of a mimbar or pulpit from the Mosque of Qaitbay. This is a medieval pulpit that is in Cairo, and there are a whole series of these across Cairo that are in a state of disrepair or they need preservation. Well, one of the things that we're doing with this, and the door that you see to the left, I mean, this was from Spain. They both use this craft of Arabic joinery, and so these displays are to show you that, but also to draw attention to the fact that these are living traditions. There are craftsmen who know how to do them. If they don't know how to do them, they figure them out. But they're also aging, and once they go, if they don't teach that to others, we will lose that craft. So Omni Abdelbar of the Egyptian Heritage Rescue Foundation, she helped us with this loan so that we could bring attention to a project that they're doing. This foundation is going around and bringing attention to these to this preservation project, but it's run and it's organized by Egyptians for Egyptian heritage, even if funds can come from elsewhere. So I think it's really nice to also end looking at one of these crafts, seeing how these are very much representing living traditions, but also, again, seeing things through the voices of those who sort of come from these cultures. And they have many ways, many perspectives that we could try using before we go to others. So I'm going to end here and open it up, I think, to questions.
Well,
might be too late for questions. I'll be happy to.
No, Ladan, this was a really illuminating introduction to this most wondrous of exhibitions. And we really thank you. I see one question in the Q&A, which I can pull up that's already in there. And it's from one of our patrons, Walter Rock. It says, is there any way to comment on the interaction, if any, between the cultures, in quotes, astronomy or astrology between Chinese, Egyptian, and Greek cultures of the time?
Sorry, sometimes I can't find the unmute. One of the challenges of this exhibition is that it's covering so many topics, so many fields, and it's almost overwhelming. I'm just trying to go back to this one image that, sorry if I'm.
Astrology.
Yeah, here. But one of the very first slides is the one that I want to get to there. There is a section, there isn't a play, this piece is in the astrology section, and just before it are two other works that are representing Indic astrology, and really, the labels for those are there to say that Islamic astrology, which really is kind of reflective of Greek astrology, didn't exist in a vacuum, that there are elements that come from Indic astrology, but also apparently ancient Near Eastern astrology. And it's something that I don't know so much about. And I would defer to my colleagues who are experts in that area. But what I love about this piece is it was produced probably in the late, maybe like 1780s or something. It's after the reign of a non-Muslim ruler in Jaipur, Jai Singh II, and he was this. So the piece itself, it's a star map. If anyone knows Durer's work, it's sort of based on, it's in that same vein. And there is actually, I believe, a star map by Durer that shows 4 philosophers on either corner, and one of them is al-Sufi, the Persian astronomer, who kind of forms the basis of Islamic astrology. So what's interesting here is that it shows an image of the constellations, but it shows the 27 lunar mansions superimposed over what we might call the Greek or Islamic constellations. And then, and they're labeled in Devanagari script, in that Indic script, which you can sort of see over here. It's just a bit of a blur. It's not letting me zoom in any further. So you get this Europeanizing style here. You get this Persian type of tradition. And this is reflecting the, and also like local Indian traditions. And this is just indicative of the very integrated artistic milieu of that period. What's also interesting is that the person it's associated with, it's actually dated to some maybe about 20 years after his reign or his death. But he was known to be one of the great patrons of astronomy in India, and probably the biggest one in that part of the world after, Ulugh Beg, who was a Central Asian, Timurid prince who lived in the 15th century, and he was based in like Samarkand. So all of these things are sort of coming together here. But when we know through other texts, even texts that are not Qazwini's versions of Qazwini's text, that his cosmography was being read, and they were aware of it, because sometimes they repeat parts of his text, and Qazwini himself is repeating part of other texts. So it just, since that time where all this knowledge was sort of translated, and before that, the knowledge is there, but I don't know specifically about Egyptian. I mean, you mentioned Egyptian and Chinese. I couldn't tell you about that. I know that I've read some information about ancient Near Eastern in addition to Greek and Indic. And the Indic tradition does come in later in some of the jewelry as well. So it really is coming in.
We have another question from one of our colleagues in art history, Amy Galani, and she says this was a wonderful presentation and she thanks you. And then she says, following up on the first question, she wants to ask whether Pliny was a source for some of this material.
I'm pretty sure, but I don't want to answer that. And I would not, I feel like it would be a safe bet. I mean, you look like you're about to.
I was asked this question a couple of weeks ago, so I checked on it.
Did you check I can check the text.
I checked on it in Travis Zade's book, and he says that Pliny is not a direct source, but materials like it, certainly read by Qazwini, and they also have a lot of sources in common.
Okay.
So there's a lot of similarity between Pliny's encyclopedia and this one. Yes, absolutely.
Travis says something else that's very interesting about the way this whole text was written. And this is something we can't see in an exhibition, which is because I think one of the things that I find interesting, and that I think those of you who know more about the scientific instruments or even certain craft practices, when you know exactly how something works, you really have this appreciation for it. So when I was writing about even, some of the pieces, or even about Have's Ghoraba, that, the contemporary piece, when I understood that she actually wove and she created these fibers and she made the substrate and she made these squares and put them together, you have a much better appreciation of what's happening. And Travis talks about the language of the text also in both Arabic and Persian. It's also meant to entertain. I mean, this book was meant to inform and to entertain. So the language, and, it's no surprise when he says prosody, writing and prosody are skills of the 20 crafts of humankind. It's no surprise, because that's something that we have to, that he appreciates.
So I think we're just a little over time now. And before we conclude, I want to once again express our gratitude to you, Ladan, for this wonderful lecture. And I invite all of you to visit the exhibition, whether in person or virtually, and to participate in our upcoming programs. I'll just say that the next of these programs will be a panel discussion. It'll be hybrid and in person. on the exhibition with various scholars in the field, and that'll be on Monday, February 10th, and you'll be able to meet Ladan Akbarnia in person. And I look forward to seeing you all in the galleries, and until then, be well, and thank you again for joining us this evening.